Now back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
You're the legal man. You got to prove that you know lie.
And welcome back to The Law Show on CL 650. I'm Zach Spencer, and joining me in studio today is Rudy Kisher and Alex Stojkovic from MKS, Immigration and Citizenship Lawyers in downtown Vancouver. And we're talking about the Citizenship Act that's in the Senate. We talked about revocation being in the headlines recently. And now we want to talk about the numbers of immigrants coming into Canada. Under the Harper government, the numbers went up steadily every year, 200 plus, and seems to be growing. And there's a real appetite in Ottawa to bring more people into Canada. But that's not really, most Canadians are saying in a recent study, maybe enough is enough.
Well, it's a little shocking. I mean, the Liberals, were very clear on their platform on a lot of things in regards to immigration, about bringing in the Bill C-6 that you just mentioned that we were talking about. When they ran the election, they didn't mention about increasing the immigration numbers. That isn't anywhere in sort of their platform at all. Traditionally, though, they used to have a policy that was in their little red book years ago that the goal was sort of having 1%. That we've never reached that. So
that's 300,000.
Over 300,000.
Well, 3.6.
Yeah, 3.6. So the highest, the Conservatives consistently increased the numbers. Despite sort of they were aggressive actually. Like they typically ran around 240 to 280,000 people coming in a year, and last year, so for the numbers for this year under the Liberal government were set at 305. So 305,000 people coming in this year, which is the highest.
Up from 280, 285, right?
Exactly. The highest that we've seen since, I think, like 20, since 1914 or something.
Does that include the refugees?
That includes everybody. So that would
be 25,000 on top of the 280 would get you to that number, right?
Exactly, right? So, I mean, it's a high number. It's not astronomical, right? But what we've seen in the paper is the Minister McCallum speaking about how he thinks Canada needs more immigration, right? And so he's been talking about this. They think it's good for Canada. It's good for the economics of Canada. I'm totally shocked by this because, if you take a look what's been going around the world in terms of the attitude towards immigration, Europe in particularly, you've seen a lot of parties coming to the fore that are very nationalistic and very anti-immigration. With Brexit going on, that part of the move there was it wasn't just about trade and the EU. There was definitely a sentiment in there that was very anti-immigrant and that we've been having too much immigration in England. So that message is out there. And if you take a look at Trump, one of his major factors is building the wall. And
keeping them out.
We have a party in power now, the Liberals, saying, well, I think we need more immigration.
The thing is, if Canada's got an open door policy to bring more people in, we could basically have the pick of the litter, though, couldn't we? This is a place people want to move to.
It's clear we have. There's no question that we get a lot of applicants. I think the Canadian government has consistently underestimated the appetite for people wanting to move here. There's no shortage of people wanting to apply. But it's interesting that the minister has pushed this out there. The Angus Reid did a study on this, put out a poll, and the response wasn't that Canadians were wanting more immigrants. In the poll, only 16% of Canadians surveyed thought that we needed more immigration. The majority of Canadians thought that the amount of immigration we had right now, or it was like something like 45 to 50%, thought the amount of immigrants that we're getting right now is the correct number. So,
well, I have an interesting story, an anecdotal story of my friend's wife, who's mainland Chinese, and she came here many years ago to go to school, and she ended up being a Canadian citizen, marrying a Canadian. They have 2 beautiful children. But she says, enough, close the door. Like, how many more people can, and she's recent immigrant from China, saying enough is enough. So is that, once you're in, is part of the attitude to say, okay, now I'm in, but enough, right?
Well, if I may, I think part of the issue that's driving this is a fundamental political difference between the Liberals and the Conservatives and in what style of immigration is being promoted, okay? Mm-hmm. Yes, we're talking 240 to 280,000 with the Conservatives, so we're not even talking about a big numbers difference.
No.
But where we are talking about a significant difference is that under the Conservatives, there was quite a large expansion also of study permit holders and foreign workers. And that's because there was a movement away towards what was fundamentally ingrained in our Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, that was a human capital model for people to come to Canada.
Without making them citizens.
Well, no, to come as permanent residents, we were going to judge them based on their ability to bring human capital, their education, their language. We weren't necessarily going to look at where they were going to plug into labor. We were going to leave that up to them when they came in. The pendulum then swung towards, in the last 10 years, towards a labor market model. Look, we need immigrants who are going to fill specific job shortages in specific areas and help build the economy.
Now but in fairness, part of that is that the research shows that people that have jobs when they arrive are, most likely to be more successful.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. The challenge, though, is that resulted in expansion largely of foreign workers. And with the foreign worker expansion, you saw cases such as HD Mining, Tim Hortons, the McDonald's case, the Royal Bank's iGate scandal, all of which bit the government a little bit in the you-know-where politically, and at the same time caused considerable anxiety on the foreign worker issue amongst Canadians that, foreigners are taking our jobs, etc. Well, a fundamental difference between the two parties is that foreign workers are something that in the Liberal Party is looked at with a little bit more ambivalence than the Conservative. Because the idea is if you bring in a foreign worker, that foreign worker is tied to a specific industry or specific job, whereas you bring in an immigrant, the immigrant has all the same rights that we all have.
They can move around.
And they can move around. So if our issue is labor shortages, why don't we just bring more immigrants in and encourage them to go work in those areas versus let's bring them to go specifically work in those areas, then we give them permanent residence. So it's that philosophical debate as to what should be done, and it isn't a straight federal conservative issue. Various stakeholders have different opinions.
But you can make a case either way. I mean, it makes perfect sense. I mean, okay, bring more people in to fill these jobs, or bring them in temporarily to fill these jobs with a path to becoming a citizen. I mean, it's six one half dozen the other.
It is and it isn't, because there is a specific number that we don't look at in Canada. Okay, and that's how many people leave Canada. All right. Increasingly, you see the Liberal government, the thinking in Ottawa that is informing the Liberal government is talking about how many Canadians leave. We have a colleague in Calgary, that Michael Green, who's a very prominent immigration lawyer, used to be chair of our section, who's always raised that as an issue. Who cares how many people immigrate to Canada? The question is, how many Canadians come in? How many new Canadians do we create minus the ones that have left?
Now, is that a brain drain where they come to Canada as a gateway to get to the United States? Because a lot of people eventually want to end up there.
That is one part of it, for sure.
I think the bigger issue is you find that we've immigrated a lot of people, especially on the old policy where they didn't have a job. So, I mean, when I started, 16 years ago, I was going to China and helping people immigrate that were 40 years old, had a master's in computer engineering, could barely say hello, and were qualifying to immigrate. So they would show up. We'd get their paperwork processed, get them permanent residency. They show up in Richmond, try and find a job.
A job?
They can't find a job. Mm-hmm. And so they head back to China.
But that's what we were talking about earlier. It's like 250,000 plus Hong Kong residents that have Canadian passports. Or how many mainland Chinese have come here, put their family in a home here, and then the dad actually works in China, right?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, the question becomes now retention. Right? How many are we retaining? Not how many are we bringing in. How many are we retaining?
But under the previous government, it was like, how much money are you going to bring in?
Exactly.
Like that was the $850,000 question.
Yeah, but that's
right?
a very small part of the program.
Well, it's a small part of the
very
program.
Small part of the program. Yeah.
I mean, it's disproportionately big impact in Vancouver, but overall, it was never that a big piece of the pie. I mean, the question philosophically then is, and something I think that's informing the Liberals at the moment, or at least the people that are thinking about this in the government, if we're letting in 400,000, let's say, or 500,000, but the reality is 100,000 are leaving, then as much as we don't want to say that we're not doing a good job of absorbing these people necessarily in the economy, we're net ahead than if we let in 300,000 and lose 100,000.
But the downside to that argument is that these people are still Canadians and have all of the rights of a Canadian citizen, but don't contribute to the economy. Back to our point of, well,
but that's true.
What would happen if there was,
too.
say you had the communist government in China wanting to take over Hong Kong and say we're now controlling it, so they have a kind of quasi relationship there, and you had 250,000 people say, oh, we're going back to Canada.
Well, okay, Zach, but let me put this to you in a different way. Well, I'm sure you know, because I know many people who have done this. Dual citizen Canadian and Americans, dual citizens of other countries who've gone.
I'm Canadian and British, yeah.
Who've gone abroad, worked abroad for many years. Then the minute they have a need surgery or something else. Boom, they're back here and they're living here for 4 or 5 months, and then resume their residency when they have a problem. That is a Canadian thing. Lots of people do that. Lots of people have been doing that for years. and the other thing is that Canadians leave. Native-born Canadians who have limited, if no connection to an immigrant group, leave because the opportunity one day is better in LA or New York or London than in Canada. So this is a Canadian problem. And if you're looking to immigration as a way of filling job shortages, skills shortages, etc., you have to look at the whole picture. What's driving people out as well as what's keeping them in. And the numbers coming in are only part of that story.
But that's part of the argument would also be to have these large numbers is that you need 300,000 people to rent an apartment, buy a house, go to Home Depot, keep the economy moving. Like our economy is flatlining at 1% growth, right? Or even could be going back into a recession. We don't know. But pumping new people in is a government's way of actually keeping the economy growing.
Well, there's been some articles in the Globe yesterday saying that, we should be a population of, 100 million people. And to get that, we've got to really increase our numbers, right? And so the plan is that sort of by 2100, by the end of this century, hopefully we would have 100 million, but we've got to really increase our immigration.
Where are they going to put them all?
Well, I mean, we're the second largest country. We got a lot of space.
But they all want to live in Vancouver and Toronto. This is the problem. And some in Montreal, but not as many.
I mean, that's the nature of the modern world, right? Everybody wants to be urban.
Well,
right?
I'm not actually sure that's true anymore, Zach. I mean, Alberta's is on the verge of hitting 4 million people. Both Calgary and Edmonton now have 2.5 times their populations from 1981.
But when you know the numbers, like people come here, where do they all end up?
40% end up in Ontario. Yeah. Right? If not more. Yeah.
But 5 years from arrival in Canada, like if you look at the numbers 20 years ago, Alberta was getting 15,000 immigrants a year. Now Alberta gets 50,000 immigrants.
Yeah, but is that going to be the same in a year from now if oil prices stay the way they are?
Well, but it was probably like that for a decade. It was like that.
Yeah, well, because there was the big magnet of money. Okay, we're going to take a quick break, and we'll pick up our conversation talking about the Citizenship Act. I also want to get into the numbers, how much time you have to spend in Canada in order to be a citizenship, and if that's changed. Next on The Law Show on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.